American English Education. The Comedy of Errors. Aegeon is a merchant from Syracuse who has traveled to the city of Ephesus. The two cities are in a feud, and the Duke of Ephesus, Solinus, has made a decree that anyone from Syracuse found in Ephesus will pay 1,000 mark fine or be executed. Aegeon does not have enough money for the fine, so Solinus prepares to execute him. First, though, he wants to know what has brought Aegeon to Ephesus. Aegeon explains that he and his wife had twin sons, and had another pair of twins as servants for their sons. They were all on a ship during a big storm, and suffered a shipwreck. Aegeon took one son and one servant, and tied himself to a mast for safety. His wife did the same. The ship broke in two, and Aegeon and his wife were rescued by two separate groups of sailors who went off in two different directions. Years later, Aegeon's son left Syracuse to find his long-lost twin brother and mother, and Aegeon followed suit, eventually coming to Ephesus in his quest to find his wife and sons. Solinus takes some pity on Aegeon and says that he will give him 24 hours to find someone to pay his fine. Otherwise, Aegeon will be executed. Elsewhere in Ephesus, Aegeon's son Antipholus of Syracuse has recently arrived with his servant Dromio. He sends Dromio to the inn where they are staying with his money and promises to meet him after doing business with some merchants. Dromio leaves, and then the servant of Antipholus' lost brother, Dromio of Ephesus, the twin of Dromio of Syracuse, arrives and tells Antipholus, whom he mistakes for his twin Antipholus of Ephesus, to come home for dinner. Antipholus is confused and asks about his money. Dromio says he doesn't know what Antipholus is talking about, and Antipholus beats him. He says that he has heard of sorcerers and witches inhabiting Ephesus and concludes that some magician is controlling Dromio, making him act strangely. At the house of Antipholus of Ephesus, the lost twin of Antipholus of Syracuse, his wife Adriana talks with her sister Luciana, upset that neither her husband nor her servant Dromio have returned. Luciana tells her to wait patiently for her husband and advises her to cede to her husband's authority and will. Dromio of Ephesus enters and tells Adriana that Antipholus would not come home, claimed not to know her, and talked only about money. Adriana thinks that her husband is having an affair, and this is why he won't come home for dinner. Antipholus of Syracuse runs into Dromio of Syracuse in the street and asks what he was talking about earlier, confusing him with Dromio of Ephesus, of course. Dromio is confused and says he hasn't seen his master since he was sent to the inn. Antipholus beats Dromio in frustration. Luciana and Adriana enter, and Luciana scolds Antipholus for treating his wife poorly. Antipholus says he doesn't know who either of these women are. Dromio guesses that they are goblins, owls, and sprites. Antipholus decides to play along with Adriana and go back to her home for dinner. They all go inside Adriana's house, leaving Dromio to watch the door and not let anyone in to disturb the meal. Nearby this house, Antipholus of Ephesus is talking with his servant, Dromio of Ephesus, a goldsmith named Angelo, and a merchant named Balthazar. He tells Angelo that he must go to dinner with his wife and tells him to bring a gold necklace he has ordered to his house later. Dromio insists that Antipholus previously denied the existence of his wife, beat him, and asked him about money. But Antipholus denies that he did any of it. He invites Balthazar to dinner, and they go to the door of his house. When he knocks, though, Dromio of Syracuse refuses to let them in. He says his name is Dromio, and Dromio of Ephesus thinks that someone has tried to steal his identity. Antipholus of Ephesus threatens to break down the door, but Balthazar cautions him against this, saying it might spread gossip about the state of his marriage. Antipholus agrees and suggests they go to have dinner with a courtesan he knows instead. Later, Luciana chastises Antipholus of Syracuse for how he's treating Adriana. Antipholus insists that he's not married to Adriana and professes his love for Luciana, much to her distress. She leaves, and a distressed Dromio of Syracuse enters. He says that an ugly, fat kitchen maid in the house named Nell knew him by name and claimed that he was her fiancé. Antipholus again concludes that Ephesus is full of dangerous witches. He tells Dromio to see if there are any ships leaving soon, so that they can get out of Ephesus. Dromio leaves, and Angelo enters. Angelo gives Antipholus of Syracuse the gold chain that was intended for Antipholus of Ephesus. Antipholus is confused but accepts the chain. Later in the day, a merchant confronts Angelo about money that he owes him. Angelo says that he is expecting payment for a necklace from Antipholus and will use this money to pay the merchant back. Antipholus of Ephesus then enters with Dromio of Ephesus. He tells Dromio to go buy a rope, which he will give to his wife. Angelo asks for his payment, but Antipholus insists that he has not yet received the chain. Angelo and the merchant have an officer arrest Antipholus. Dromio of Syracuse then enters and tells Antipholus that there is a ship leaving Ephesus soon. Antipholus is confused and tells Dromio to get money from Adriana for his bail. Back at Antipholus' house, Adriana is discussing her husband Luciana, who tells her about how Antipholus denied his marriage and tried to woo Luciana. Dromio of Syracuse enters and says that Antipholus has been arrested. Adriana gives him money for Antipholus' bail. Dromio goes to find Antipholus and runs into Antipholus of Syracuse in the street. He gives him the gold, much to Antipholus' confusion. He asks how Antipholus got out of prison, and Antipholus tells him to stop fooling around. He says that all of this confusion must be the result of sorcerers in Ephesus. A courtesan enters and asks Antipholus if he has the gold chain he has promised her in return for a diamond ring. Antipholus and Dromio think she is a witch, call her Mistress Satan, and tell her to leave. The courtesan says that she has heard Antipholus has gone mad, and now knows it to be true. She plans to go to Adriana. Meanwhile, Antipholus of Ephesus is still under arrest. Dromio of Ephesus finds him, and he asks if Dromio has the bail money. Dromio is confused and says he has the rope he was sent for. Antipholus is furious and beats Dromio. Adriana, Luciana, the courtesan, enter with a conjurer named Pinch. Adriana thinks that Antipholus and Dromio are mad and possessed, and asks Pinch to try to perform an exorcism on them. Antipholus threatens to tear out Adriana's eyes, and Pinch ties Dromio and him up, planning to lock them in a dark room until they come to their senses. He takes them away. The courtesan says that Antipholus took a diamond ring from her and promised her a gold chain, but has not given it to her. Just then Antipholus of Syracuse and Dromio of Syracuse enter, with their swords drawn. They chase all the women away, thinking they are witches. Antipholus wants to leave Ephesus immediately. Angelo apologizes to the merchant for making him wait for the money he is owed. Just then, Antipholus of Syracuse and Dromio of Syracuse enter. Antipholus is wearing the gold chain, and Angelo asks how he could deny that he received the necklace. Antipholus says he never denied it. The merchant swears that Antipholus did deny this, and the two prepare to duel. Just then, Adriana enters with Luciana and the courtesan. Adriana says that Antipholus is mad and asks for help in tying up Antipholus and Dromio. The two men flee to a nearby abbey, and the abbess comes out to see what is going on. Adriana explains that her husband is mad, but the abbess refuses to let anyone into the abbey. She asks what has befallen Antipholus to make him mad? And Adriana says it might be that he has become unfaithful. The abbess blames Adriana for this. First, for not scolding her husband, then for scolding him too much about possible infidelity. The Duke enters with Aegeon, preparing to execute him, and Adriana asks the Duke also for justice against the abbess. She explains what has happened with her husband, and the Duke sends for the abbess. A servant comes from Adriana's house and tells her that Antipholus and Dromio have escaped and attacked Pinch. Adriana says this cannot be true, as Antipholus and Dromio are in the abbey. Antipholus and Dromio of Ephesus arrive, and Antipholus asks the Duke for justice. Aegeon says he recognizes Antipholus as his son, but no one pays attention to him as Antipholus tells the Duke what has happened to him earlier in the day. He was locked out of his own house, then Angelo failed to deliver the gold necklace he promised him, then he was falsely arrested, then Dromio failed to bring him the bail money, and then he was tied up and thrown in a dark room by Pinch. He and Dromio had to gnaw the ropes that tied them up in order to escape. Adriana and Luciana deny locking Antipholus out of the house, though Angelo says he witnessed this. He says he did give Antipholus the gold chain, and the merchant agrees. Aegeon interrupts to say that Antipholus is his son, but Antipholus says he doesn't know who Aegeon is. Finally, the abbess enters with Antipholus and Dromio of Syracuse, who recognize Aegeon. The abbess also recognizes Aegeon and identifies herself as Amelia, his long-lost wife. She explains that she was separated from Antipholus and Dromio of Ephesus after the shipwreck and became an abbess. Everyone clarifies just what has happened during the day with the two Antipholuses and two Dromios. Antipholus of Ephesus offers to use his bail money to pay Aegeon's fine, but Duke Solinus decides to pardon Aegeon for free. Amelia suggests everyone come to the abbey to hear at large discoursed all our fortunes. Everyone but the two Dromios leave, and then both Dromios follow them walking side by side and hand in hand as brothers. Commentary. The Three Unities. The Comedy of Errors is one of few Shakespeare plays that obeys the three unities of theater. A rigid neoclassical set of rules for plays derived from Aristotle and popular in the 17th century. The unity of place dictates that the play should happen in a single place, in this case, Ephesus. The unity of time dictates that the play should take place over no more than 24 hours. This play occurs all in one day. And the unity of action dictates that the play should focus on one main plot action. In this case, the confusion of Antipholus of Ephesus and Antipholus of Syracuse. Summary and analysis of the Comedy of Errors. Act 1, Scene 1. As the play begins, Solinus, the Duke of Ephesus, is leading Aegeon, a merchant from Syracuse, to be executed. Solinus explains that there is great enmity and discord between Syracuse and Ephesus, and that there is a law in Ephesus that any Syracusans found in the city are to be executed unless they can pay a fine of 1,000 marks. As Aegeon barely has 100 marks, he is to be executed. Aegeon says that he is glad to be executed as this will end his troubles. Solinus asks Aegeon to explain and tell him why he came to Ephesus. Aegeon says that his grief is unspeakable, but begins to explain. He was born in Syracuse and had a wife. He made a good fortune as a merchant, but when one of his business partners in Epidamnum died, he had to travel to Epidamnum. His pregnant wife came along and there gave birth to two male twins, completely identical. At the same time, in the same inn, a poor woman gave birth to two identical male twins as well. Aegeon bought these twins to bring up as servants for his own sons. and prepared to sail back home with his wife and the two pairs of twins. Along the way, though, there was a great storm at sea, and Aegeon suffered a shipwreck. Trying to stay alive, Aegeon and his wife both tied themselves to masts of the ship, and each took one of their children and one of the servant twins with them. Fortunately, two ships approached to rescue them. However, a huge rock rent Aegeon's ship in two, separating him from his wife. One ship rescued him and his pair of children, and the other rescued his wife and her pair of children. The two ships were separated, and Aegeon was separated from his wife. Aegeon and his one son lived in Syracuse, and when the son turned 18, he wanted to travel abroad with his servant in order to find his mother and brother. Aegeon decided to do the same and traveled all around furthest Greece by himself, roaming clean through the bounds of Asia. Thus he eventually came to Ephesus. Solinus pities Aegeon, but says he cannot behave contrary to his city's laws and cannot pardon him. However, he gives Aegeon one day before his execution and tells him that he can try to find friends to pay the 1,000 mark fine for him. Aegeon has little hope that he will find anyone to help him, and speaking of himself, says that this will only procrastinate his lifeless end. Act 1, Scene 2. Elsewhere in Ephesus, Aegeon's son Antipholus is talking to a merchant. The merchant warns him to pretend not to be from Syracuse, or else face a 1,000 mark fine or death. Antipholus sends his servant Dromio with his money to the Centaur Inn, where they are staying, and says he will meet him there soon. Antipholus invites the merchant to dine with him, but the merchant says that he has to meet with certain merchants he hopes to do business with. The merchant wishes for Antipholus to be happy, and then leaves. Antipholus says that he cannot be happy, as he is seeking his mother and brother, but cannot seem to find them. Just then, the servant of Antipholus' lost brother, Dromio of Ephesus, arrives and tells Antipholus, whom he mistakes for his identical twin, to come home to dinner, as his wife is hungry and tired of waiting for him. Antipholus is confused and asks where his money is. Dromio of Ephesus is confused by the question and again tells Antipholus to come home for dinner, or else his wife will be mad. He says that Antipholus gave him no gold. Antipholus angrily asks where his 1,000 marks are, and Dromio replies that he has some marks from him, that is, from being hit, and from his wife, but not 1,000. He jokes that Antipholus would not want him to give up 1,000 marks, that is, 1,000 blows or strikes. Frustrated, Antipholus hits Dromio, who then runs off. Antipholus says that he has heard of dark working sorcerers and soul killing witches in Ephesus. He guesses that some such magician is controlling Dromio and making him act so strangely. He leaves to go to the Centaur Inn and find Dromio, who he still thinks as his own Dromio of Syracuse. Act 2, Scene 1. At the house of Antipholus of Ephesus, the twin of Antipholus of Syracuse, his wife Adriana talks with her sister Luciana. She is upset that neither her husband nor her servant have returned. Luciana suggests that Antipholus has maybe gone to dine with a merchant and tells Adriana to be patient, as a man is master of his liberty. Adriana protests that men should not have greater liberty than women. Luciana tells her sister that men are masters to their females, but Adriana disagrees. She says that if Luciana were married, she would think differently, because she would be burdened with like weight of pain. Dromio of Ephesus enters and tells his mistress that Antipholus refused to come home and acted as if he didn't know her. He says that Antipholus seemed mad and talked only of his gold, then beat him. Adriana tells him to go back and fetch Antipholus anyway. He leaves reluctantly. Adriana tells Luciana that she is sure Antipholus is having an affair. and this is why he is behaving so oddly and pretending not to know her. She pities herself, thinking that Antipholus no longer finds her attractive. Luciana scolds her for being jealous of Antipholus' supposed mistress, but Adriana tells her she doesn't know what it feels like, and continues to bemoan her state. She says that he has lost interest in her, and that she will weep, and weeping die. End of recording. To be continued.
Wow, 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 wow.